What's up, college football fans? Jack here with another episode of The Big and Bold. As soon as that national championship game was over between Georgia and Alabama, I immediately started looking at next year. I already dropped a video on my 10 favorite games for the upcoming season. Now, I'm dropping a video on my favorite teams for this season. And what I mean by that is, I looked at the high school recruiting rankings, returning production, the two deep depth charts, coaching changes, things like that. And I went across each Power 5 conference and I tried to identify the teams that I believe are the most likely to meet and or exceed their expectations for next season. And I ended up hitting 7 teams, stopped at that 7 mark, and I only went with the 7 that I am really confident about. A couple of them are under the radar, a couple of them are obvious. Hopefully one of your teams are in this 7. Let me know in the comments once you watch the video if you agree or disagree with the teams that I've selected. If you think I'm too confident, or tell me why you're not confident about these 7 teams. So let's jump right into it. Please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It helps grow the channel. And the number 1 team, and it's one of my obvious ones, I got the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I think the reasons are obvious. Okay, when you have 3 guys on offense, they're all competing for a Heisman Trophy next season, you can kind of see why that would lead me to believe that they're going to have a great year. In almost every year, the last 20 years, Ohio State's had a great year. Longer than 20 years, as a matter of fact. They're coming off of an 11-2 season where they won a Rose Bowl. It wasn't what they wanted. They wanted a Big Ten title. They wanted to get into the playoff and compete for a national championship. Now this year, despite how it pains me to say it, I think Ohio State is a favorite of mine for the national championship this season. I don't think they're just getting a Big Ten title. I think they're going to really go all the way to the national championship game. If they win it, lose it, time will tell. Not going to try to predict the future there. But I really like Ohio State this season. And I'll start off by talking a little bit about their roster. Like I said, they've got 3 studs on this offense. C.J. Stroud was a Heisman finalist last year. Trayvon Henderson at running back, over 1,200 yards on the ground as a freshman. And we saw what Jackson Smith-Njigba could do for them at wide receiver as their number 1 guy. So now you look at their offense, and they do replace some guys on the offensive line. A couple of stud wide receivers in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. But they've got young studs to take over behind those guys. Time will tell if the changes to their team will take them from being a New Year's Six Bowl caliber team to being a national championship caliber team. Last season, they had issues on the offensive line when it came to pressure on C.J. Stroud. And they had issues with their defense. So they go out, bring in a new defense coordinator from Oklahoma State, veteran guy, and he's taking over an incredibly talented defense. But it didn't come together last year. So time will tell if this season the new faces on the offensive line help protect C.J. Stroud, and if the addition of a new defensive coordinator with some new faces on the defense will help sew up those issues. And if Ohio State will again be a national championship contending team that can beat anybody in the country. And when it comes to their schedule, that's just another level of confidence I have. You look top down, the games that concern me the most are Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe Penn State, and Michigan. All of those but the Penn State game are at home in Columbus, Ohio. You may be a little nervous about going to East Lansing to play Michigan State or going to Beaver Stadium to play Penn State. But I'm still really confident in this team. The fact that they get to play Michigan, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and Iowa all in the shoe just further leads me to believe that this could be a 12-0 team. Any game they drop this year is going to be an upset against the Buckeyes. I think they're going to be the favorite in all 12 games. They're going to try to get revenge on the Wolverines for that loss last year in the Big House. They dropped 50 on Michigan State. I don't think they're worried about Penn State this year because I wouldn't really be. Notre Dame's got a new head coach. Graham Mertz is your quarterback at Wisconsin. I really think this could be a 12-0 Buckeyes team and not just a contender for the Big Ten or the playoff, but really a team that can make it to a national championship game. So that one kind of feels obvious for some people because every year Ohio State is in the thick of it. But I really think this year for Ryan Day, they can make it to the national championship game. At number 2, one that isn't talked about as much, but I really like NC State. they've got some losses on their roster. You know, Emeka Emizi looks like they're going to have to replace him at wide receiver. That was their number one guy. And then you lose a stud left tackle. But this is really about Devin Leary. He went nuclear last year for 3,400 yards and 35 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions. He's got a massive offensive line blocking for him, full of seniors and juniors. And the defense brings back a couple of studs, specifically Drake Thomas, who led the team in tackles and interceptions. If they get that kind of production from Devin Leary again, and the defense steps up for them this season, I really like NC State as my second favorite team in the ACC. Obviously, the ACC is one of the weaker conferences in college football, but when you look at their schedule, they could easily start off 6-1. You got to worry about going to Clemson, but if they pull off an upset at Clemson, one of those teams replacing their defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, their offense absolutely fell apart last season. And then down the stretch off of their bye week, their 3 most difficult games are at home with Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and Boston College. I think NC State could be a sneaky team to go 10-2, and we could see them playing for an ACC title and in a New Year's Six Bowl this upcoming season. So I really like NC State. I think that they can take a step forward from last season into that New Year's Six Bowl potential ACC title winner. So definitely keep an eye out for NC State. They're one of those sneaky teams that I'm really confident in for this season. Up to number 3, again, another team probably not going to be talked about a lot, but the Kentucky Wildcats. You know, you have all these teams in the SEC that people like to talk about, and Kentucky kind of gets forgotten. But when you look at what Kentucky returns production-wise, you got Will Levis at quarterback, transferred from Penn State to start for the Wildcats last season. He's going to be in his second year as a starter, and he gave them some playmaking at quarterback that I think they've desperately needed under head coach Mark Stoops. And you bring back starting running back Chris Rodriguez, who was a 1,300-yard rusher for them last season. The one concern for them offensively is Wan'Dale Robinson's out the door, who was their leading receiver and had a phenomenal season for the Wildcats. But to make up for that, you have Tavion Robinson transfer from Virginia Tech. The offensive line is massive, and the defense has always played good under Mark Stoops at Kentucky. So from a roster standpoint, I love what Kentucky has going on. And when you look at their schedule, it's actually a very favorable schedule for Kentucky as well, considering you don't play Alabama, you don't play LSU, you don't play Texas A&M. You got to get past a road game against Florida in week 2. You got to get past a road game against Ole Miss. But even if they split those games, and I believe they can beat South Carolina and Mississippi State at home, they can come off that bye week to go on the road to Tennessee and have the rest of their season in their hands. You got Georgia at home before finishing the season off against Louisville at home as well. I think that their floor is 9-3. I think they have the ability to even exceed that this season, which is maybe a little outlandish. You know, it might be hard to say, oh yeah, Kentucky can go 11-1, right? But easily Kentucky can go 10-2, and we could again see them in a New Year's Six Bowl, which, by the way, we haven't seen Kentucky in a New Year's Six Bowl since 1994. So it's been a while. So Kentucky could go 9-3, and that would be a fine year for that program, considering the struggles that they had for years before Mark Stoops got to the program. But moving on to my next team at number 4, we got the Oregon Ducks. Now, when you talk Pac-12, everybody really wants to look at USC and Utah. But I want to take a moment to talk about Oregon. They're actually the only team on my list with a new head coach, no longer Mario Cristobal. It is now Dan Lanning, former defensive coordinator for the Georgia Bulldogs. They're probably the team I'm the least confident about when talking about this list of 7 teams that I've got. But hear me out. The way that Dan Lanning has used the transfer portal to help shape this team with some of the transfer portal losses, I think has been very impressive. Defensively, they've got one of the best linebacking cores in college football, led by Noah Sewell. Absolute stud last season for them. Had over 114 tackles. And then Justin Flo, former 5-star out of high school, he's ready to step up and pop for them this season as well at linebacker. They were able to use the transfer portal to sew up corner and their defensive line. And offensively, Bo Nix comes over from Auburn to take over at quarterback. He started a lot of games for Auburn. Now he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Oregon Ducks. He's got a great wide receiving core to throw to with Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin. The real question is the run game. The offensive line is well recruited. It always played well under Mario Cristobal. But the lack of Travis Dye, who's now transferred over to USC, that will likely hurt them. And you're going to miss the presence of a guy like Verone McKinley at safety, for example. So there are some losses on the roster. But I actually think that Oregon has a pretty clear path to play for a Pac-12 title, which I think for first-year coach Dan Lanning would be a phenomenal year. Don't get me wrong, starts off rough against his former team, Georgia, but every game of concern for me is played at home. BYU, Stanford, UCLA off of a bye week, Washington and Utah, all at home. You don't play USC. I think that this is a clear path to play for a Pac-12 title, at the very least as a 9-3 team that could maybe surprise us and win another game or two, just with you look at how their schedule has lined up. Washington's got a new head coach. Stanford was not very good last season. We'll see if they could surprise us this year. BYU's got some losses, and we'll see how BYU does this season. But I'm a real big fan of Oregon this year. A lot of roster turnover, new head coach, that may lead to some concerns, especially when they likely lose to Georgia week 1. But they get their season together. By the time that bye week rolls around, they could have a lot of momentum rolling into the second half of their year. And I think Oregon's going to be playing for a Pac-12 title again this season. I like USC. I considered putting USC in this spot over Oregon. And I like everything about what USC has going on right now when it comes to head coach and quarterback. But everything else is a bit of a concern. Defense is going to have issues. A lot of youth on their roster. A lot of new pieces that need to come together. I'm willing to bet that Oregon is the team that kind of exceeds those expectations, and Oregon is the one to play for another Pac-12 title this year versus USC, who's got to compete with Utah, and again, a lot of new pieces on that team as well. So I do like Oregon this year. Moving on to number 5, got the Michigan Wolverines. Now, of course, I am a supporter of Michigan. I'll admit that there's bias. However, I believe that I can convince you that Michigan is primed for another big season under Jim Harbaugh. A lot of the success Michigan had last season was based around their pass rush and their run game. So you think, wait, Hassan Haskins had like 20 rushing touchdowns last year, huge part of their offense, he's out the door. And Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo are about to be first-round picks into the NFL. Those guys were both studs for the Wolverines last season. So how am I supposed to expect Michigan to do well, especially with a new offensive and defensive coordinator? I can explain that. Most Michigan fans don't think Josh Gaddis had a whole lot to do with the offense succeeding. He was a huge disappointment his first 2 years. They had 0 passing game for the first half of the great season they just had. And the general consensus is that the reason this offense was successful was because Jim Harbaugh implemented his run-first approach to the game. The offensive line was there for them. Not a whole lot of Josh Gaddis' influence. Defensively, that's where I'm concerned for the Wolverines. Mike McDonald out the door, replacing 7 starters from the defense. But this could be the best offense Michigan has had under Jim Harbaugh, and I'm really confident about that. They've probably got the best running back duo in the Big Ten with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. They returned 3 offensive linemen from the best offensive line in football last year, and probably upgrade at center with Andrew Vastardes out the door, and Aldo Watimi coming in, Remington Trophy Award finalist for Virginia. You return both your starting tight ends, and they've got a great quarterback competition going on between J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara. Worst case scenario, you go with Cade McNamara, who led them to 12 wins last season and played very safe, low turnover football, or go with high upside former 5-star J.J. McCarthy, who flashed very often last year when on the field for them. They've got too many wide receivers to know what to do with. It's not as good a wide receiver room as, say, Ohio State, but I do think it's the second best wide receiver room in the Big Ten. Ronnie Bell comes back. You've still got Cornelius Johnson. They've got a ton of speed with Roman Wilson, Andre Anthony, A.J. Henning. And defensively, it's well recruited. I think they're going to look to win with their offense, not with their defense. But they've still got a couple guys that project to be studs. Mozzie Smith, Junior Colson, Will Johnson, 5-star freshman of high school at corner. But the biggest component of this is their schedule. They've got 4 gimmies at the beginning of the year, all at home. You go to Iowa in week 5, but we saw what Michigan did to Iowa last year. I think Michigan offensively will be even better than they were last season. And I don't think Iowa did anything in the offseason to improve their offense. That was abysmal last year. You get Penn State and Michigan State at home. Real concern is going to Columbus, Ohio at the end of the year. That's where I'm nervous. I think their floor is 10-2, and they have a ceiling to win another Big Ten title and make it into the playoff. I really like Michigan this season and think that they're going to be a competitor for another Big Ten title. But as I said earlier, I also really like Ohio State this year, so I don't know if it's going to happen for Michigan 2 years in a row, but at the very least, I think they're going to have another great season. At number 6, we got Arkansas. Great year for Sam Pittman last season with Arkansas. They bring back KJ Jefferson at quarterback, who led the team obviously in passing yards and rushing yards. But not only that, Dominique Johnson and Raheem Sanders at running back both went for over 500 yards last season. You got to replace Treylon Burks, but Jaden Hazelwood comes over from the transfer portal at wide receiver to fill that void. Landon Jackson comes in to add to that pass rush from LSU. He still got Jalen Catalon at safety. You got Bumper Poole at linebacker. The issue for Arkansas is their schedule. They have a very difficult schedule being in the SEC. If they manage to go 8-4 with the schedule they have, they're probably a great 8-4 team. I think they're going to start off 3-0, though, beating Cincinnati, South Carolina, and Missouri State. I don't think Cincinnati is going to be the same team it was this season as it was last year, replacing a lot of talent from their roster. Issues really pop up after that, though, with Texas A&M and Alabama. You have to go to Mississippi State and BYU, come off your bye week to go to Auburn, but you finish the year off playing Liberty, LSU, and Ole Miss at home before going to Missouri. At the very least, because of the roster they've got there in Arkansas, I think this is an 8-4 team that can flirt with 10-2 and have a great year for the Razorbacks. An 8-4 for Arkansas is not bad. And finally, at number 7, I got the Texas Longhorns. Another team, hated team by many. Steve Sarkisian did not have the year a lot of people thought he was going to have in year one. I thought they were going to go about 8-4. They ended up falling even below that. But you can make the argument that Texas is going to have the best trio at running back, quarterback, and wide receiver in the Big 12. Iowa State is replacing a lot from what was supposed to be a good team last season. Ended up being a bit more of a mediocre team. Oklahoma's got a new coach. TCU's got to make some changes. Baylor loses a ton of talent. Issue for Texas is they play Alabama week 1. But they get out of that game after week 1. I think they go on a serious run, possibly beating Oklahoma like they almost did last year in an incredible game. I think they'll beat Iowa State. What really determines the year for me is going to Oklahoma State. Is Oklahoma State going to have another strong year like they did last season? That is going to kind of determine the kind of year that Texas has, in my opinion. But when you bring back Bijan Robinson, who's primed for another great year for Texas, Xavier Worthy was a stud as a freshman, over 900 yards and 12 touchdowns with Casey Thompson at quarterback. Now you bring in Quinn Ewers, who is the number 1 player in the country coming out of high school. Had that weird saga where he goes to Ohio State after originally being committed to Texas, now he's back at Texas. But Quinn Ewers, Bijan Robinson, and Xavier Worthy could make for a very, very dangerous offense for the Texas Longhorns. And it was an offense that was already dangerous last year. Defensively, I think that's where they really wanted to make some changes. You keep some of the guys you like, Luke Brockermeyer, DeMarvin Overshaw, and you bring in some new faces as well. I think Texas should have a very good year, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if they were actually the team to beat for the Big 12 this season. I think they'll be playing for a Big 12 title, so definitely watch out for Texas this year to have a big jump by at least 4 or 5 more wins than they had last season. Willing to shoot my shot on that one. So with that said, those are my 7 favorite teams for this year. I think they're going to be fun to watch. I think they're going to potentially exceed, at the very least, meet expectations. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. This is an open conversation. Let me know why you're not confident about the 7 teams that I've selected that I'm confident will exceed expectations for this year. And let me know why. So thanks for listening, everybody. Again, please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And keep an eye out for more of my videos coming out in the future discussing the upcoming college football season.